Aloha to all of you online today. Thank you for joining us. You know, with its foundation in Hawaii, the East-West Center stands at the heart of this century's most consequential region, the Indo-Pacific, home to more than half of the planet's people and 2/3 of its recent economic growth. It's center stage for some of the world's best opportunities for progress, as well as some of the most daunting challenges to peace and sustainability. While many Indo-Pacific nations are growing in affluence, influence, and international prominence, the region also faces mounting impacts from climate change, COVID-19, corruption, and geopolitical competition. Waves of regional change pitch communities between breakthrough and disaster. East-West Center's work in the next 5 years is built on the conviction that capable, committed, and connected leaders make the difference in turbulent times like these. We believe leadership transcends social sectors and roles. It is an individual's capacity and commitment to making a positive change in their own organizations, communities, and nations through influence, interactions with others, and innovation. East-West Center's strongest lever of positive impact is convening, developing, and equipping more promising and diverse leaders to address critical challenges together. This strategy I'm about to share with you is anchored in the Center's long legacy of leaders. As many of you know, because some of you are alumni out there, we have 68,000 alumni, 53 chapters that demonstrate the differences that leaders can make. Over the past 6 decades, many of you alumni out there have helped to make critical discoveries, decisions that enabled the tremendous growth we see in the Indo-Pacific today. Our alumni continue, yes, you, continue to catalyze positive change, and your tremendous legacy is the Center's foundation for growth. So thank you all who are here today and the many who are not for your support of the East-West Center as we recommit to preparing emerging leaders to face tomorrow's challenges of common concern. So I'll start, and I have a series of slides that I'd like to share with you to go over our strategy. First, I want to share a little bit about our strategic planning process. You know, to, of course, better focus our efforts, we collaborated with a variety of groups. We polled a wide range of stakeholders, and probably many of you on the line as well, if you are alumni. This included, of course, our Board of Governors, our staff, our partners, alumni. The planning activities including assessing the regional needs, selecting priority areas where the center can make a difference, focusing on the center's distinctive strengths and competencies, and establishing key institutional goals and strategies. And the results, of course, I will share with you right now in a few minutes. So first of all, we have to start with our regional assessment. What are the East-West Center's key areas in which we can contribute to the current world environment? You know, we really distilled down a large range. In fact, when we brought in the Board of Governors on February 11th, we continue to look at what are all of the challenges in the region. And as you can imagine, the wall was filled with all kinds of ideas. So with all those challenges, you know, we can feel overwhelmed. So we got our discussion to narrow on several areas in which the East-West Center can make a difference. And I want to go over them with you. First of all, you know, a changing environment, of course, is what came up, as you can imagine, with many. As environmental degradation and climate change grow ever more severe, Indo-Pacific communities face the world's worst impacts, but also hold the key to a thriving Earth. East-West Center can work alongside with partners and emerging leaders to build capacity and common passion to conserve natural resources while increasing human resilience. Environmental mismanagement, such as overfishing, pollution, and deforestation, yield consequences for communities, including food and water insecurity, heightened vulnerability to natural disasters, forced migration, and conflict. These in turn decrease resilience as impacted individuals grapple with diminished economic, educational, and health outcomes. Informed, participatory decision-making shaped by leaders dedicated to equitable and sustainable use of natural resources will make a difference. To make good decisions and back them up with action, leaders at all levels need reliable information, multidisciplinary understanding, and international collaboration. An East-West Center can be that hub for sharing these vital tools, as well as building those capabilities. We also distilled it down for this need for good governance. Global democracy is in decline, with 2/3 of the world's population now living in autocracies. Free and open societies in the Indo-Pacific face challenges of resource scarcity, internal conflict, and outside pressures that threaten destabilization. Increased disinformation efforts and attacks on media lead to distortions of public perceptions. Women, youth, minorities, and other marginalized groups are often disenfranchised just when their participation would be most vital to good decision-making. To improve governance, leaders at all levels need skills, knowledge, and support to strengthen democratic institutions and accountability. The Center will support government and civil society leaders with shared data, best practices, educational opportunities, and international networking. We will help to empower civil society organizations to play a crucial watchdog role and combat disinformation. We will work to bring disenfranchised groups to the table. The next area, the third area, is that there is now a spotlight on the Pacific. Pacific Islands nations stand in a geopolitical spotlight, which brings challenges, but also unprecedented opportunities. Pacific leaders are navigating these circumstances together, and East-West Center stands with them as a supporting partner. Sustainable development in the face of environmental degradation is the Blue Pacific continent's greatest challenge. Livelihoods in Pacific Island nations are threatened by biodiversity loss. Storms and natural disasters batter the islands with increasing frequency and intensity. Geographical isolation creates barriers that worsen the impact of environmental disasters on food security and health. In addition, Pacific Island nations face intensified international pressures, targeted discrimination, disinformation, and challenges to their sovereignty. COVID-19 continues to threaten lives and slow progress across sectors, while the legacy of a nuclear past still affects communities today. East-West Center seeks to support Pacific leaders with educational opportunities, professional development, and international networks. East-West Center's Pacific Islands Development Program, the only US-based member of the Council of the Regional Organizations of the Pacific, or the CROP, as well as the Secretariat of the Pacific Islands Conference of Leaders, is a bridge to allies, a hub of expertise, and a platform for Pacific voices. So after evaluating those key areas in which East-West Center can make a difference as we assess the environment, we looked at our mission. And our mission dates back to 1960, that the East-West Center promotes better relations among people and nations of the United States, Asia, and the Pacific through cooperative study, research, and dialogue. You know, this, of course, was based on the mandates that came in 1960. You know, then Senator Lyndon Johnson, along with other congressional leaders, led to 62 years ago this year that President Eisenhower would sign the authorization for the establishment of the East-West Center. And I often think about it coming out of a World War II, and into a Cold War. There was a clear need for a place and space where East and West could come together, where scholars could come together and dialogue and receive training. So we looked, of course, at the centers, the assessment. What is it that we bring in the past? But where do we go for the future? What is the vision of the East-West Center over the next 5 to 10 years and beyond? We look to the East-West Center in collaboration with our partners, and that's many of you online. We want it to be a premier institution in the Indo-Pacific to convene, develop, and equip a network of leaders, of course, to solve those challenges of common concern, not just to talk about, but really to solve, and not just an individual, but a network. And those are key that I will share with you a little bit later. And this, of course, all based on our guiding values of respect, innovation, and collaboration, and much, much more. So to our center's strategic priorities. Now, interestingly, I've gotten a lot of feedback, as you can imagine. And some said, are these in the order of priority? But really, if we look at it, it's more like pillars. And perhaps we should have used that word pillars. But these are certainly the priorities that the board, the staff, alumni, and other stakeholders agree with. And in fact, the day in which our Board of Governors met together on February 11th was the day that the White House strategy on Indo-Pacific was released. And it's a fascinating correlation, but they are very much nested. Not that one looked at we didn't actually have it, so it's not like we intentionally nested it. But I see that we all assess the environment much the same, where environmental challenges are at the forefront. And so we need some solutions. Good governance are at the forefront. So you can see these 5 areas. Number 1, developing and equipping leaders. 2, convening impactful dialogues. 3, partnering with the Pacific Islands. And 4, fostering those environmental solutions. And 5, supporting good governance. Now, with the number 3, I've often been asked as well, does that mean it's only the Pacific? The Indo-Pacific and the United States is part of that Indo-Pacific. So all of these cover the entire Indo-Pacific. So what we've said is that number 3, partnering with the Pacific Islands, East-West Center has an historic connection with the Pacific. Being geographically located here in the middle of the Pacific makes sense. Our understanding of cultural language and just that historic connection that we've had gives us that ability to bolster our Pacific Islands development program that exists here at the East-West Center. So I plan to go down the strategies, and I will just touch upon it. I welcome, of course, at the end, any of your questions. So what does it mean to develop and equip leaders? And when we mean leaders, do we just mean government leaders, institutional leaders? Absolutely not. Leaders meaning change makers. I heard an alumni say that last week, that really are those change makers at all levels. A leader in a small group, a leader in their community. But it's not just that leader alone. Our goal that you see there is an influential and active network of current and emerging leaders who are innovative, culturally and technically competent, and collaboratively address issues of common concern. I think this is where the challenge is. We have a lot of efforts out there to address these challenges, but it's bringing those leaders together. When we listen to the stories, the power of the story, alumni after alumni, no matter where I've went, whether it's Palau, Fiji, Washington, D.C., New York, or around the world, or a recent class of G20 Asia-Pacific Leadership Program, they've all said it's the power of that network to learn from each other. Where would they from the Pacific meet somebody from Burma, or from Burma to Nepal, or where you would see Pakistan, India, and Kashmiri all together becoming friends, despite what the geopolitical situation is? It's that network that can help one another. And our strategies to get there really are focused on 3 areas. First, we want to be able to recruit and fund accomplished and diverse emerging leaders from the United States, Asia, and the Pacific, who possess, of course, a common desire to accelerate environmental sustainability and sound governance efforts. Now, we're not limiting it to that, but whatever their multidisciplinary area of study is, but being able to integrate some of these issues on environmental sustainability as well as governance into the curriculum or program of study. The second is we want to weave all center functions, which includes convening and research, to educational and professional development programs, as well as alumni engagement, publications, and of course the arts. And the third area is we want to run transformational and experiential programs, hands-on programs that support emerging leaders with tools needed to solve those complex challenges. Moving on to priority 2, and convening impactful dialogues. And this picture here you see is from our International Media Conference and then our Alumni Conference. It was a wonderful event with Maria Ressa and also one of the key leaders from Meta, as well as over 300 journalists from 35 nations that came together. Very impactful. And we're also having the Pacific Island Conference of Leaders from September 12th to the 14th, with heads of nations, including Hawaii, Guam, CNMI, and American Samoa, with nations of the Pacific, to talk about those issues of common concern. We want to continue to be that trusted, respectful convener that fosters that multi-sectoral, multilateral dialogues to deepen mutual understanding, advance regional cooperation, and create collaborative solutions. But first you have to come to the table and they have to trust that space. So of course, our strategies are to diversify, expand our partnerships with a diverse government, business, academic institutions, and other nonprofits, of course. Of course, to attract that multi-tiered dialogues and conferences while using these opportunities to benefit center participants. And what do I mean by that? You know, we had a wonderful working group that the PIF had here, beyond biodiversity beyond national jurisdiction. And they were able, our Pacific Islands Development Program was able to integrate some of our Pacific Islands leaders or interns as note takers, as people who are observing. So now here you have multi-generation, multi-tiered, coming together, learning, engaging, and finding solutions. The second area, of course, we want to, at the East-West Center, sponsor our own recurring conferences and summits around the strategic priorities of environment, Pacific, of course, and governance. And we want to ensure that balance of voices and perspectives. And the third thing is we want to build on our Hawaii campus geography, our host indigenous culture, Kanaka Maoli, and the legacy connection to the Pacific by expanding signature characteristics of East-West Center convening to Washington, D.C., the national and regional locations around the world with our alumni, and of course online. We've seen that we are able to do this much more effectively and reach more audiences online. Our third priority is partnering with Pacific Islands. You know, our goal is to have an active hub for Pacific Islands expertise in the area of culture, art, economics, civil society, government, environment, and sustainability. We want to be a platform to amplify Pacific Islands voices. And we want to be a bridge between the region and partners. And we do this through several strategies. First of all, we want to expand capacity and role of the Pacific Islands Development Program. That is relatively small right now. We want to sustain and leverage its unique position by expanding it. And number two, we want to increase the Pacific Islands participation in all our programs with a balanced representation from Micronesia, Melanesia, and Polynesia, including Native Hawaiians. And three, we want to amplify the voices and expertise by revitalizing a credible and inclusive Pacific Islands report. Number four, we want to foster environmental solutions. And we want to be a regional hub here at the East-West Center of environmental expertise, which we have a lot of in the Pacific, South Asia, and Southeast Asia. And collaborative action, generating just community-based solutions that improve ecosystem health, mitigate climate change, and foster human resilience. And we want to do this in three ways. Number one, we want to build center-wide multidisciplinary capacity in the areas of climate change, transboundary water governance, that includes rivers and oceans, land resource management, and disaster resilience. Two, we want to increase our region-wide capacity for leaders to make decisions that promote human resilience and equitable, sustainable use of resources through partnerships with governments, educational institutions, NGOs, media, and communities. And three, we want to raise public awareness and increase cooperation on environmental action through accessible research publications, policy findings, and convening activities such as the arts and other public outreach. And priority 5, or pillar 5, supporting good governance. Our goal is to have a cooperative international network of public servants and civil society leaders, empowered to foster transparent, effective, and inclusive institutions, peaceful dispute resolution, secure economies, and respect for human rights. And the strategies to support this are, number 1, we want to empower public servants. And that's a whole range. Sometimes when we say public servants, people think of government. But public servants are those who are committed to the services of the public. That can include not just established government leaders, but again, those community change makers. We want to empower them by creating programs and products around best practices of fiscal transparency, public services delivery, and economic opportunities. And number 2, we want to enhance the capacity of independent media. We saw that by the events of the International Media Conference, as well as many other media programs, as well as the Jefferson Fellows and other Pacific Island Media Fellowship programs. We want to do this by equipping journalists with knowledge and networks to better inform the public and keep governments accountable through factual and objective reporting. And 3, this last, empowering women as change makers through leadership programs, networking, and advocacy. The fact remains is that all countries are made up of almost 50% women and men. But unfortunately, the statistics show that women are not at the table when we talk about government's decision-making, access to education, a voice that can make a difference. So we're not maximizing all of the human capacity of all of our nations. So we certainly want to invest in that at the East-West Center as part of good governance. Now, I'm just going to shift a little. So those are our pillars, but I want to talk a little bit about some of the distinctive core competencies and strengths of the East-West Center. And there are many, because many of you out there have shared it with us. And I just want to review them very quickly. First of all, we have exceptional programs at the center. We know that. I've heard, just even meeting with alumni over the picnic that we had this weekend, they tell the stories of how it changed their lives. These programs that brought people together, allowed them to meet people they never thought they would meet. And I remember one of the alumni from the 70s said that she and her 1975 class, they all have a chat, that they chat every day from around the world. But this is not unique. I hear that from the 60s, 70s, 80s, 90s, 2000, and current. This is the special secret sauce of the East-West Center, are these exceptional programs that bring people together that last a lifetime. They become more collaborative. They're willing to help each other transform, help each other to build. And that's why it's no secret that many key leaders around the world have been alumni from the East-West Center. Also, we want to maximize the home at the heart of the Pacific here in Hawaii. This place of convening, this place that's beautiful and diverse, rich in history. This idea of people-to-people connection. And that's why the vision so long ago, as Governor Burns and other leaders said, this is the perfect place to have it. But the elements of the mana, or the spiritual energy that's here, can be transported around the region, because those are elements that connect us. So having convenings in the region and around the world with those elements of trust and open transparency, balance, those are some key elements or distinctive core strengths of the East-West Center. We also have a lot of in-house expertise. Our researchers and our staff here that are very experienced enrich the programs. And we want to integrate that with all the programming. But not just in-house as well, using that in-house expertise to reach the other networks that they all have. And that leads us to the diverse partner network. We have a diverse network, but we want to continue to build on that strength. Also, we are known for inclusive dialogues, that sometimes we don't just have one side of the story, we have both sides of the story. And the International Media Conference, again, was a great example, as Maria Ressa shared about the challenges of of social media, and no longer do the content producers of journalists have control of how content is distributed. And at the same time, we had in the audience a key senior leader from Meta who talked about what they're doing. So we have both sides to be able to share in dialogue, to find solutions to the challenges of free and open press. And the sixth is we have this amazing network. I mentioned 68,000. You know, this network is multi-generational, as I expressed, from 1960 to today. And we have active chapters who are trying to enhance those networks. And we want to be able to build on that. Also, we want to continue to build those bridges that East-West Center has done between the region and the United States. Certainly being that policy bridge, people bridge, understanding bridge, and we're perfectly situated to be able to do that. So some of the strategies that you see listed here are leveraging our unique strengths, and we call these cross programmatic strategies. You know, so again, focusing on expanding the leadership development framework. What does that mean? By including all voices on what that looks like, not a model that's imposed on people, but it's developed organically. We also want to make sure we're evaluating our programs regularly so that we can increase accountability and always improve. We have a lot of legacy programs, but we're going to be in a process of re-evaluating those programs, making sure that it meets those needs that we talked about, that we assessed are needed. Also, we want to offer participants some program outputs, an opportunity to publish, speak, to apply different action plans or ideas that they have, and also offer and improve the number of course credentials that we can provide. We also want to invest in our campus. You know, we are not 100% in our wonderful Hale Manoa that many of you alumni who are on the line probably spent some time in there. And by the way, a lot of the furniture is still from 1960, but in very good shape. But we're only at 50% capacity in there. We have the capacity to use 100% of that. And that's just here on campus. But the opportunity to expand what's happening, invest in our Washington, D.C. office as well. We want to invest in those capital improvements because, as I said, well taken care of, this wonderful wood paneling around me, just early 60s and 70s, really needs to come to on par in terms of environmental sustainability of this wonderful 21-acre campus. And we want to, of course, use this venue to attract a lot more meetings and convenings and opportunities for others. We also want to align our expertise with leadership development. We want to develop a research agenda that's synced with the East-West Center priorities and align the center-wide programming to capitalize on these research activities. And we want to expand our visiting expert program with specialists from across the region and formalize our research mentorship program. The research program here is very unique, wonderful history, and we've had a lot of mentorship and connection. We want to formalize that connection, that those PhD students or any students in any or participants in any of our programs would have access and opportunity to a lot of our research department who are doing amazing work. We also want to partner to develop regional capacity. We want to identify those key partners to enhance environmental and good governance capacity throughout the region, including educational, research institutions, government agencies, businesses, local and international NGOs, activists, and informal leaders. We want to expand the East-West Center's research network by tapping into the alumni as a key resource, something we know is there, but we have not tapped into it. We also want to leverage Pacific relationships to add perspective and insight into all of our programs. Also, we want to amplify those perspectives from the region. Being that bridge between the region and the United States, I think we can certainly feature a variety of the perspectives. We have a series of why Asia matters to America, why America matters to Asia, and we break it down by country, I think we can elevate those voices and share it with the rest of the nation as well as the world. Also, we want to elevate those voices with personal experience of addressing shared challenges, especially women, youth, Indigenous people, and marginalized groups. And in that space of arts and culture, where it is a safe space to come together, to connect with our common humanity, we want to continue to leverage the arts and culture as a medium for understanding and connection. And it has been very, very successful for so many decades. We also want to enhance our long-term impacts for alumni, enhance commitment to lifetime investment in alumni, provide networking, mentorship, and collaboration opportunities. So existing participants with alumni, matching those two together with potential mentorship programs. We also want to foster alumni affinity groups around those priority topics of environment, Pacific governance, and provide alumni with opportunities to pay it forward, of course, through funding, mentorship, and multi-generational connections. And the last cross-cutting strategy is create those foreign and domestic bridges, contribute to the deepening of the U.S. Indo-Pacific relations through partnerships, outreach, and analysis projects such as the Asia Matters for America and America Matters for Asia initiative. It has been very successful. We have even been able to show why various countries matter to various states, and we want to continue to expand on that. We also want to cultivate that understanding between the United States, Asia, and Pacific policymakers through those meetings and dialogues, and create a balanced cohorts of U.S. and international participants. The beauty of the programs over the decades, and we want to continue to sustain that, is the balance between U.S., Asia, and Pacific participants, so that we really are creating a space of understanding, a safe place to understand one another. So next steps. So what I've given you is the foundational strategy, the priority areas, as well as the strategies to realize the goals that I mentioned. You know, we want to, over the next couple months, shape these to really specific programs, the action plans. And we're going to do that over the next 6 months, and by December have a strategy or action plan that outlines the program plans that will fulfill this strategic framework by synchronizing multiple functions across the center to meet the goals that I just mentioned. Also, we need a strategic finance plan, optimizing the budget processes, funding streams, a mix of appropriation, fundraising, grants, and service delivery to support the programs. Also, we have a capital improvement plan group. So by the way, all of these have working groups that are working collaboratively together to find an action plan for each of these areas. Capital improvements, I kind of mentioned, really it's a long-term redesign, upgrade, and improvement of the East-West Center facilities in Honolulu and Washington, D.C. As I mentioned, we've taken really good care, but we want this to last the next 62 years, well beyond the time of most of us here. Also, the strategic communications plan. We want to harmonize marketing and branding, outreach, and online presence across the center, integrating the voices from the region. And the next area, of course, is organizational structure and human resources. As we look at the programs, we also will have to look at, are we structured to be able to, and are we resourced to be able to implement the plans and the programs that we want to in order to meet our goals. And with that, of course, strategies don't happen without change to organizational culture. So one of our working groups is looking at that. How do we build the culture internally so that we can help everyone externally? I think that's very important, while instilling, of course, those values, upholding diversity, equity, inclusion. That's so very important. And we'll do this, of course, through monitoring and evaluation, and ensuring that we have the internal processes and policy improvement that need to be put in place in order to make the strategic plan a reality. Not always easy to do, but with your help, thank you for taking the time to really listen. I thank all those who have taken the time. That includes our executive leadership team, our Vice President, Dr. Satula May in Washington, D.C., also our Director of Research, as well as our Chief Operating Officer, Ambassador retired Bob Riley, and our management team who have led all of these programs to date and will continue to work. How do we move forward in the future? All of our Board of Governors have been integral part of this. And what's fascinating, they come from a range and diverse background, and yet they were able to agree on these 5 priorities, and they have approved and took the time to walk us through over the last 6 months, really taking a lot of time out of their busy schedules, as well as our alumni. I was able to reach out and share this with our alumni, and they gave us feedback. If those of you are in the line, you gave us feedback, and we heard you. We adjusted and changed based on what we heard, so we're so very grateful. Our foundation, our friends of the East-West Center, as well as many others who care about the centers, thank you for your time. So I think I'll wrap it up for right now so that I can allow you to ask some questions. So thanks for your time. I appreciate all that you do. You're only on here because you care about the East-West Center. Thank you.
Thanks again, President Vares-Lum, for the wonderful presentation.
Thanks, Jay.
So exciting for everyone who's been involved in the process to be going public with the plan and all the thinking behind it. I wanted to go ahead and take the moderator's prerogative and answer the first question as they're coming in. So the question I wanted to ask is, as you know, the strategic planning document sets a perfectly clear direction for the next 5 years, super exciting and essential. But at the same time, as you acknowledged and focused on, we're operating in a very dynamic region, uncertain times. So I was wondering if for everyone who's online, you could just talk a bit about how we'll ensure that the strategy stays relevant across the next 5 years, how we'll embrace innovation amid sort of the shifting geopolitical landscape that we're operating in.
Great question, Jake. You're absolutely right. When we talk about, how do we remain relevant? How do we know we're on track? I think what's key is that we have the metrics in place. Those metrics that will measure, is it effective? Is it meeting the needs? I think, of course, we want to do the annual regional assessment. I think we took some time to do that, to look at what are the needs of the region and the world, and what can the East-West Center bring in all of that? Where are we most effective? Because we can't do everything. If you try to do everything, you can't do everything well. So we have to distill it down, and we will continue to do that. That's a constant annual process that we can adjust, shift, and change, because it is dynamic. And while it's written in a document, we have to continually assess it if we want to be successful.
Absolutely. And I think that continuing interaction with alumni, folks out there as stakeholders, would be really essential to that. So I wanted to ask a question that's come in from East-West Center alumni and the head of our chapter in Mongolia. And that's just how we can empower, how we can engage more with new local chapters that we're establishing around the region.
No, thank you for that. We are excited to, and aloha to Mongolia. Thank you for that. I think, Christina Monroe is our director, and she is really trying to look at ways in which we can connect alumni in region to current students and programs, and even not just bringing them here, but how do we do them out in the region? How do we find the resources and funding to be able to catalyze new events that happen in Mongolia, Malaysia, Nepal, Bangladesh, around the region? There have been events we've had, but it hasn't necessarily been linked to alumni. And I think that is an untapped, wonderful resource. So thank you for the question.
Absolutely. You touched a bit on this just now related to alumni, but a question from online is how strategic priorities will impact the current programs being held in London Center. Will there be new programs? How are we sort of looking to adjust?
Great question. And even our staff has a lot of that question. We have a working group called the Programs Working Group. And we just did an initial sort of survey of what are all the programs and what are they, what's the curriculum or the activities look like, and what needs are they meeting? And then take the strategies that I laid out and looking at where do we need to change, alter, add, delete, or sunset some programs. And this will be iterative because we have a lot of partners out there, right, in different programs that you can't just, change is gradual with these kind of programs. You have investments, people have looked at it a year prior, 2 years prior. So this will take us some time to get into place. So in about December, we will know those programs and certainly want to be able to share the outcome of those programs at the end of the year. Thank you for the question.
So this next question actually gets at sort of from online, gets at one of the methods and means that we might use as we're looking to at our programs, and that's around the idea of affinity groups that you mentioned in your presentation. Are there any affinity groups that are sort of high priority for you that you're thinking of? For example, women leaders in environmental action. Sort of how will we approach interacting with those affinity groups to inform our implementation of the strategy?
Yeah, I think we are open to looking at the ideas. It's sort of like surveying the landscape, right? What are those affinity groups that we need to look at? How do they match our priorities? Like you said, women, environment, women entrepreneurs. And, when we look at things like governance, while it doesn't say economic development, governance to me in terms of those public services are key is economic development. So entrepreneurship, sustainable economic investments, those kinds of things. How do we address the issues of climate change and those public health services? Those are all things, programs that fall under governance. And so there is a whole wealth of possibilities, like we had those Post-it notes all over the wall at the Inland Center. I see those as we need to do the brainstorming. It doesn't come from me alone. Oh, I think these, and that's not how we did this strategic plan. It actually emerged from, lots of paper distilled down to these set of agreements. And I think affinity groups will be there because there's so many that we could. What are the key ones that the East-West Center, and so of course we welcome those ideas, and we'll be working with Christina and the East-West Center alumni groups out there.
Wonderful, thank you. Another question, folks online are really heartened to hear the focus on the Pacific Islands. And a sort of follow-up question on that issue was how the center will ensure that the territories, you mentioned that we're working with territories as well as independent nations, are involved and receive the attention that they deserve in our country and in the region.
Thank you for that. Our Pacific Islands Development Program has been centered on that. As we look at the Pacific, the Blue Continent is vast, and it includes, the territories of the United States, Guam, CNMI, American Samoa, and of course, the state of Hawaii. We are key, we have been for centuries, part of the Pacific, and we always will be. And I think that's one of the charges that we show, that we can, create boundaries, but I like to say that fish know no boundaries. So if we're worried about IUU, they don't know the boundaries, whether it's pollution, whether it's currents. We are all connected in this continent, so we must hear the voices. And I think we've done that recently through Arts Festival of Pacific. Will be in 2024. We had our first Manny Crisostomo, who we started off that journey to introducing the Festival of the Pacific and the voice of the Chamorro voice, as well as our Native Hawaiian Pacific Islander Museum Institute that just occurred. So here in this short time, we've had a series of bringing those voices along with other Pacific nations, and they're seeing the synergies and connection. Really powerful. Thank you for the question.
We have another question around the East-West Center role in Hawaii, I think, and folks are wondering what outreach initiatives are being considered to upgrade information and service relationships with Oahu communities, broader communities in Hawaii. How can mutual appreciation be strengthened between the East-West Center and our community? residents here, and what kind of interactions are we thinking about to enhance the community relations efforts of the center in our home here?
Oh, thanks for that question. You're absolutely right. We leverage Kanaka Maoli, Native Hawaiian, indigenous culture, the idea of ohana, aloha, all of that. And when participants come here, they connect with the place, space, people, and heritage. And it is our responsibility to make sure that the people of Hawaii also are connected to this place. And so one of the initiatives you saw in the Pacific Islands Development Program is the programs would be, of course, while we included, Micronesia, Polynesia, Melanesia, including Native Hawaiians, but we also, students from Hawaii. Our last program, we had students from Hawaii who are integrated in our programs have an opportunity, as well as the arts program and culture program. We have a lot of the public schools. We could, working with Keith Hayashi, the superintendent of the DOE, or the Hawaii State Legislature, where we've shared what we are trying to do with our House and Senate of the legislature. The governor, who is key on the board, as well as First Lady Donna Manoige has been on the board, as well as President Lasner. So we want to expand those. We are going to have, I think, one of the major, Hawaii exhibits that we're going to have. We want to continue to do that, partnering with Bishop Museum as well on Celebrate Micronesia, but other kinds of activities that we'll continue to do. But we definitely want to continue to expand. We have been working towards it over the last 6 months, and we'll expand it even further. Thank you.
So dovetailing with what we just mentioned about our activities in the community, there's a question around the analogy of lauhala weaving that's come up frequently since you've entered office. I know it's a really powerful and meaningful philosophy for you and for the center, and we're just wondering if you could explain to the wider audience what that philosophy means.
Lauhala weaving, often you start at a central point and then you go out. We call it the pico, right? Your center, your navel, which is key and critical to Native Hawaiian culture is, that's where life begins. So when you begin that at the center can be viewed a variety of ways, right? We've said the center can be viewed as the center itself. The center can be viewed as the individual student. The center can be viewed as the Pacific. But in any of those scenarios, you have to weave and overlap. And if that weave is not tight, it's not very functional. But it has to be tight, connected, overlapping in order for it to be woven. And that's the same way as these programs that we have. Rather than independent activities, we're much more powerful if we can weave a mat that we can all sit on, and that's functional. In Pacific cultures, when you have something challenging, we don't just come to the table, you come and sit on the mats. Whether it is to eat, share as a family, to discuss very hard, critical things, that weaving is essential. It connects the art, culture, the craft, the analogy that we're making with our common humanity and discussions and knowledge.
We have a question online about there's a heavy emphasis on leadership development in the strategic plan, and wanting to know what a modern thought leader looks like to you, and sort of what diverse skills should they have in order to be effective? So going back to the model, I just want to express that question is a great question, because oftentimes, in the past, institutions have said, I have a model and I want to impart this model on you. Whereas there's different ways when we look at basic elements of a good leader, right? With selfless service, with seeking to understand before being understood. Those basic elements of a leader who cares about people before themselves, who's willing to be open-minded to hear a variety of perspectives, that treats everyone with dignity and respect, that creates collaborative environments so that people can speak truth to power. But that overlapping with culture
is, I think, something unique we bring, right? Not just a Western model of leadership, but these are models of leadership, 36 nations in the Indo-Pacific, United States, and, and the world. Those, I think what's unique about the East-West Center, and has been, is that we look at those individual cultures and how they look at the dynamics of leadership. But there are essential elements like human rights that transcend culture. In a leader, a good leader, and what would that be? Just asking that question to Asia Pacific leaders who were here, defining it, you saw some critical elements that everyone agreed on, but yet there are some cultural elements that are unique to each location. And I think that is the beauty that the East-West Center brings, has been, and we want to continue to grow what that looks like.
Great. Thank you.
Thank you.
A question, I think this is as much a question about what the East-West Center institution is planning to do, and also about how alumni, supporters, friends can engage, many of which we have listening. So just a broad question, how do we get the world to know more about the East-West Center, and in particular, going beyond our sort of traditional audiences, for example, academics or policymakers?
I appreciate that question. That's part of our strategic communications plan, Jake, yes. Right? We look at what are those key messages we want out there, that we are that institution that has a long legacy. Look at all of you online. I mean, you are that legacy. You are the reason why. And frankly, I tell the story wherever I go, whether it's Congress, State Department, other NGO partners, foundation partners. Frankly, anyone who will listen. People invite me to lunch, you can expect me to say, can I share a story with you about some amazing alumni? And but surprisingly, I still get invited to lunch even after that. They want to hear because it changes people's lives. And the more of us who are sharing that, that's why you online with a strategic plan, with these priorities, people can go out and share. And with the stories that we want to equip all of you who are on here with stories about, we have a picture here, and Dr. Tammy Tabe is here. And by the way, she's our staff member. I don't know if you can see this here. She grew up in the Solomon Islands, roots in the Kiribati. But I remember one day she was telling me a story that she'd go over 3 rivers to go to school. And I said, oh, you mean kind of driving? I'm imagining this dirt, a bridge, maybe an older bridge. She said, no, I would walk over those rivers with my books over my head. And mind you, she's probably about 20 years younger than me. And, I was just amazed at the commitment to education. And she found her way to seek scholarships to get her bachelor's, and then became a fellow later on after her bachelor's here at the East-West Center. Gave her an opportunity to work towards her PhD, and now does amazing research on environment and its impact on migration and economic development in the Pacific. So here is a Pacific Island woman that educated through East-West Center, a network of alumni, and I know this because I've been able to travel with her to Palau and Fiji, and everywhere I went, Tammy, I mean, people are out there just, it's that network. I mean, I don't think there was a single time I was with her that someone did not come up to her connections in the Pacific and even here. But that's one example of the many pictures on faces here. And these faces are a sample of those who are online that can tell you the same story. And it does not fail that whatever alumni I talk to, it is another powerful story. And it is those stories that we need to get out there. And we are working with the team. And I'm so grateful, you and your team have been great at wanting to share that. But people can help by sharing the story of the East-West Center. And we've been wonderful beneficiaries, as I understand that Deputy Secretary of State Wendy Sherman went through the Pacific, and someone told her a story about the East-West Center, and they went back to DC. So, it's those kinds of stories that resonate. Because if this place helped you, then you can help others by sharing the story. I unashamedly ask people to help the East West Center, because it's not about us sitting here. It's about tomorrow's leader for the next 5, 10, and beyond. And I think if all of us believe that and we all agree, then let's share the stories together. Because I'm not going to be able to do this alone. I will need all of you to help me to share the story. And but I want to also build trust with you that we will be good stewards of whatever resources come our way, so we can ensure that we have that next generation of leader. And I say leader very carefully, because leaders can look very different. Whether you're a small initiative in a small group, making a difference for a small group of people, to a head of state, those are the differences. Thanks, Jake. I apologize for the long answer to that question.
It's a wonderful answer. Thank you so much. And this will be our last question from online. And such an inspiring stories that you related, and the transformative impact of opportunities that come people's way of the sort that the East West Center can offer. So, speaking of opportunities, this last question is: how do we envision our new priorities driving additional funding for the East West Center and opportunities we can provide for more people in the region?
I think by saying developing and equipping leaders in these areas that people care about, that the Pacific is in the spotlight now, that environment, the whole world is concerned about this. Rivers and oceans that feed us, that absorb a lot of the pollution and challenges that we face in climate change. The impact of governance, we see that all of these areas are resonate with everyone I talk to, whether they are congressional leaders, bipartisan congressional leaders, whether they're the National Security Council, whether the State Department, funders. So grateful we were able to meet with the Rockefeller Foundation, Luce, who has funded us a long time, Japan, ambassadors. They all have been just all ears, and you see heads nodding like yours is right now, Jake, because yes, this is the area that we need to focus on. So now, what next? I urge people, of course, we welcome the resources that are out there to help the next student, the next participant, the next change.
Thank you so much, President Vares-Lum. We've come to the end of the time that we have. I didn't know if you wanted to have any last words.
Well, thank you, Jake. I thank you to the CER team who has worked so hard to make this happen. I really want to thank each and every one of you, because it's not every day people say, I want to sign on to that webinar of the strategic plan, but you did because you care about this place. That's clear to me. So you are part of our East West Center Ohana because you care about the change makers of the future. So thank you so much for what you have done, for being a part of today. We're so very grateful. And we are here if you have more questions, of course. Our team here welcome your questions via email. Please feel free to send and visit our website. You can contact us that way as well.
Thank you so much.
Mahalo nui loa, and aloha to all of you.
Thank you so much.